bring the guys up and we'll let them tell you a little bit more about it. But thank you everybody for coming, and we will do a book signing afterwards here at the stage. But right now, give a very big welcome, please, to our audience.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
That is not punk rock energy. We need a little more. How's everybody doing? We're getting there. Okay.
It's officially a punk rock event because there's someone with a 930 Club t-shirt.
Nice.
Yep, you had to look to make sure that you were there. It is official. So we're here to celebrate the release of Tearing Down the Orange Curtain, how punk rock brought Orange County to the world. So I'm also the author of Corporate Rock Sucks, The Rise and Fall of SST Records. And so we just thought we would talk about our books for a while. And instead of like reading passages and patting each other on the back, we just thought we'd kind of get into the stuff, like the nitty gritty of it, like how we made it, what got left out, what embarrassing faux pas we made, and unbelievably outrageous things that happened along the way. How does that sound?
Great.
Okay. And then you'll get a chance to ask your questions about whatever you want. There are no limits on the questions tonight.
Punk rock for you.
So let's start with like how did you guys work collaborating together, and how did this book come together?
Well, for us, it started, Dan and I had been working together a long time at OC Weekly. I was a music editor for 7 years. Dan was writing a ton of stories for me. We eventually moved on as the Weekly became extinct. We found ourselves working for the opposite of that publication at like a entertainment trade publication that shall not be named, but we were very like dissatisfied with our jobs and looking to get out and having some free time eventually to write something that was a passion project that I think both of us had a lot of affinity for, which was OC punk rock. It wasn't really until that like we sat there at our desks across from her, sort of adjacent to each other. Diagonally, and we're like, has anyone done a book on OC punk? And it was literally the question that sparked this entire thing, because the answer was no, and it was like completely shocking. Given how many books there are about the LA scene and New York and the UK, like we were just sort of flabbergasted, especially being from Orange County myself, and never really seeing that represented in book form. Of course, like for years, like publications like the LA Times and the Weekly and so many great magazines have like chronicled it, but as we all know, with the internet, things tend to disappear and are hard to trace unless you have a physical copy somewhere, which I know people here do have physical copies of stuff because you're record aficionados, but for the average person, it's really hard to like go and dive in for, find an article on Agent Orange from 1981. So we just figured that for us to be able to put a stamp on the history of this scene, obviously we were far too young to even like contemplate writing it ourselves. We had to write this through the words and thoughts of literally like hundreds of band members, managers, record store owners, and so that's sort of like how we came about with the idea of it. And we started it, and this is around 2019, and then a little thing called the pandemic happened. So we decided to, instead of like keeping it pushing at that time, we were like, okay, well let's give this the time and space it needs. So we put it on pause for a little bit, and then we kind of circled back, I don't know, maybe a year or two later.
At the middle of 2021 is when we caught up with Bud from Sublime, who was our first big interview, and we flew up to Reno and hung out with him for about 3.5 hours, and it was like, okay, this thing is, it's coming on its way, but it didn't get real till about December of 2021, when within a span of, could have been more than 12 days, we spoke with Dexter Noodles and Mike Ness and Johnny Two Bags, and I was like, okay, this thing is real and we have to do it, and we have to do it now. And that's kind of how this thing got going.
Did you have a book proposal at this point?
Yeah, we were working on that at our old job.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the Wi-Fi, old job. And we were able to kind of just get it done in bits and pieces. And obviously, we had our own words and stories and stuff to pull from articles we'd written, but there was just a whole unknown world of like what was out there in terms of research beyond the interviews we knew we had to get. What else could we find? So it was kind of this big sort of long treasure hunt of finding different sources and things to pull from, and obviously some great interviews from some of the key bands that were around.
Yeah, it was the character hunting was the journey was oftentimes better than the destination when finding some of these people.
Yeah, it can be a very dangerous wormhole because sometimes you really do want to read that article from 1981 about Agent Orange, and feels like it'll be way more edifying than anything else that you could research or write at that particular time. And if you do have those articles in your garage, hold on to them, do not throw them away, no matter what your significant other says. Just blame me. What about working together? I've collaborated on projects with people, which is its own unique thing, but you guys are collaborating with each other. Did you get any fights, pull each other's hair, anything like that?
I think what you said last night about it was the funny part.
Well, I mean,
I said that we had minor disagreements, and it was probably about 2 or 3, to which you said.
one man's 3 is another man's 8.
So the way we did it, because I remember when we first sat down and did it, it was right after the Bud part when we were writing it for a proposal, which is going to get maybe a little bit too in the weeds, but the actual writing started in earnest, I would say, after we went to Cleveland to Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We did 3 days of research there. We felt super inspired and just got going. We wrote it together, and then after that, we gave it a minute to breathe, and I think we started for real on like January 3rd, 2024, writing 300 words a day. We figured that's just a regular blog post to get our sea legs, which was Nate's idea. And then from there, it was just basically, okay, I finished this part. I'm just gonna write this part next. And he would say, oh, I finished this. I'm working on this part next. And it was like, okay. And we kind of saw where the holes were, like, okay, so that's done, that's done, that's done. Who is doing this? It's like, oh, I finished mine. I'll just tackle that. And same with Nate. It would be parts. Like, okay, we're missing this. I'll just handle it. And it was just a very seamless process of putting it all together.
See, I'm very jealous of all of that. Corporate Rock Sucks came out in 2022, which means that I had sold the book right. I remember we submitted the proposal right when like the NBA like said we're done for the season. They canceled their season because of the coronavirus, and I was like, is there really a book industry, or is it just people at home in their underwear kind of pretending like the world, the global economy isn't falling apart? Like, is this really happening? And it was really happening. And so my book was a pandemic project, and I just, because like I had all these ideas of traveling around to places and interviewing people, and I wasn't traveling anywhere. What I was though was ordering lots of old records off of Discogs, reading.
Dangerous, very dangerous.
Oh my God! But I kind of figured out how to tell when a listing is from someone who used to be a DJ or someone who used to basically have promotional material, which is writing about SST records. That was sometimes more valuable than the record itself, to me. The information that the label was putting out about itself in 1984, 1985, 1988, as that evolved. So I didn't have someone to email and say, hey, how's it going? It was just darkness for me. And then I kept thinking about, and I'm wondering, I want to ask you this, is that in terms of how you structured it, I would like have daily panic attacks because I'm writing the history of a record label, and like 3 months in, it was still like 1980 or something like that. And I'd be like, at this rate, I'm never gonna finish.
Oh,
Yeah.
we felt that.
Yeah, we feel the pain on that because literally at the dawn of the scene, from the time it really kind of, kicked off in Orange County to what we consider like sort of like the fall off-ish era of like 86-ish.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every year was packed with stuff. Like it could have been its own book each year. And so for us, it was like, we have a word count. You know, our editor gave us 120,000 words, which he probably thought was a lot, but we kind of were like, I think I saw it early on, I was like, shit, that's not enough.
Yeah.
And we also include in there, because it's the early days, but it's also, like I said, that mid 80s to late 80s period of kind of like just the diffusion of punk, where you had like all the bands just kind of either becoming a metal band or quitting or reforming to the point where they were kind of almost unrecognizable. And then the sort of the 90s, and then it goes into, we get into hardcore a bit, and then, you know, we also talk about the Warped Tour and the construction of that from like the beginnings of Golden Voice, which most of you have heard of, and the rise of that, and how, you know, just all of that stuff to do what we posed in the title of the book, which was how Orange County brought punk rock to the world. So it was just about trying to chart those early beginnings, where it started, and you can see how different it was from like where it ended in our book in the year 2000, in terms of when you have, you know, huge festivals, and you have like these, you know, rock stars out of these kids that were, you know, when they wrote their first songs at 16, still singing them at, you know, in their 50s, and it's like, but at this, the only difference is like they're, you know, these well-respected, super established bands now. So like, how did that happen? You know, so we kind of take you through that each chapter. So
it's like from Punk of the Month to getting the key to the city was kind of the through line for this. Seeing that, well, that was at least in the case of Mike, seeing his rise. But starting with The Nest always felt like a logical point, because that was ground zero for everything in Orange County. It felt like it's the venue. It was Jerry Roach being with his, you know, hard scrabbledness, and then, you know, Vandals writing about. I mean, it felt like that first EP. Every song mentioned the Cuckoo's Nest or Zubies. Mm-hmm. So, if those of you who know what Zubies is, it was a country western bar that was next to the Cuckoo's Nest, and they shared a parking lot, which you can imagine what that was like. You have young punks and old cow folks battling it out. So it really informed and set the tone of what things were to come, and we felt like starting with TSOL was the right move, just because they were the first and baddest and most dangerous band out there, and scary, and everyone, all the punks were terrified of them, and it just felt like that set the tone of like what was to come with how this was structured. Then going into the HB stuff, which Nate crushed, it was just like seeing the crowd and seeing Beach Boulevard. It kind of laid the foundation going into Fullerton stuff, which became what the Orange County sound was widely known for. But without those two chapters, you don't get that.
Yeah, I really like how you structured it, in that it was geographic, but not completely, but it wasn't linear either. It was more by era, so that you have the freedom to kind of move back and forth as you progress along the story. I thought it was really effective, because if you tried to silo it, we were talking about this in the green room, that if you did it like Dan Ollie's book Sell Out, just focus on one band at a time, it would get redundant really quickly.
And we would just miss so many bands. Like, there's just no way to do that.
And there's so many interlocking moments with a lot of these bands that it just wouldn't have worked for this.
Right. Well, when I was writing, I have two Cuckoo's Nest stories from the writing and the research I did for the SST book, and from the LA Black Flag, the Cuckoo's Nest lives large in the lore because it's where Henry Rollins had his first official California performance as Black Flag's fourth singer, which was kind of a big deal at the time. I know there's got to be at least one person in the audience who's like, really, Henry Rollins is the fourth singer? It's true. It's true.
It's all in the book.
And then the other one is that the Stains. How many of you know the Stains from LA? Well, the guys in Black Flag, especially Chuck and Greg, loved the Stains, and there was like a real mutual admiration between the two, which you wouldn't think, but like Greg and Chuck and Dez, they would go to Boyle Heights to hang out with the Stains not the other way around. You would think it would be, oh, they must have come to the church, or they must have come to SST headquarters. No, it was early enough where they would go to Boyle Heights and hang out with Stains. And they would talk them up wherever they would go. And when they got to Texas, there was a band called the Stains there. And so Black Flag engineered this thing where the Stains and the Stains would play together at the Cuckoo's Nest. But by the time the Texas Stains got to Orange County, they changed their name to, anybody know?
MDC.
MDC, excellent, yeah. So Cuckoo's Nest, there's just lore all over the place.
Well, that place is, I mean, the stories that we heard about everything that went on, and speaking with Jerry Roach and catching up with him was just, it was a real snapshot into the, I mean, those were it was only open for 2 years, but those were 2 critical years in the evolution of not just Southern California punk, but punk as a genre, with the lore that just came out of there.
So my next question for you guys is, you mentioned that you were a little bit younger. I'm younger too. I graduated high school in 1986. So I did not, see, that's the year Black Flag broke up, is when I graduated high school. Just
Nice.
to put it in perspective that, I wasn't at all these shows either.
I was busy coming out of my mom's womb in 1986.
I think we were just moving to Long Island around that time, so I don't. It's a bit of a haze.
So were you
It's 5 years old.
Were you surprised by any of the stories of people being beaten up for being punk?
I mean, we knew about it just from folklore, but hearing it directly from the source was definitely a bit, I wouldn't say jarring, it wasn't surprising, just the level of detail. It's like even last night we were with Noodles from the Offspring. He's like, I have no problems in Orange County. When I went to Hollywood is when I got stabbed for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think being, involved in writing about the scene in Orange County and interviewing a lot of these bands, and doing cover stories on them, it didn't shock me so much, but it was, to me, it was an opportunity to look into it a little bit deeper than they just were outsiders and outcasts, because at the same time, they were being, sort of ostracized or in some cases just really hunted for being who they were in their hometown. You look at a lot of research or study a lot of books and you talk to people who were in the LA scene, and a lot of people looked at Orange County as the scourge on LA punk. So they were getting kind of on both sides. LA punks thought basically, Orange County was sort of ruining the scene by coming up and being ultra violent and sort of this big wash of just male testosterone sort of ruining the punk party that they were having. And I think one of the things that we, talking to, the Jack Grishams and Agnews and people that were there, was just that, OC punk was not a monolith, and I think that there was definitely people who were, they were fucking shit up in the pit. They were definitely being crazy, but I think there was just also, the opposite of that existed as well. So I think we try to take a little bit of a nuanced approach in how we describe Orange County as a scene, because there's just a lot of different elements, and so that's what I hope people also get out of it. Whether you were there or had never really even heard of any of this stuff before, to get more of a well-rounded idea of what the scene really was from different people's perspectives.
Well, I remember very vividly a story that Tony Brandenburg told me when I was first getting to know him about 20 years ago. And it was a very, like you said, vivid story. Maybe he told this story to you about how he went into Pioneer Chicken to get a meal, and it was it'd be his only meal of the day, and he's leaving and he got beat up in the parking lot for being punk. But even what that meant was maybe wearing a white t-shirt and short hair and having a paper clip in your ear.
Yeah.
I mean, not your average barista looks like today, which is completely fabulous. But I think if we would compare it, it was we wouldn't think today that was punk. That was just
Right.
Barely that. But I remember Tony describing in detail that the guy beating him up had on a suede jacket with the tassels hanging down, that it was being beaten up by the Marlboro Man.
Yeah, well, there was a group of people that Jack Grisham described in our chapter on the Nest called the Crop Dusters, which were basically like a bunch of Hessians, like you described. They would just go around like beating up punks who they thought were like, you know, a target. And so, but at a certain point, I mean, you know, they fought back. And so you have stories about, you know, Jack and company, whoever, like throwing him off a bridge or whatever. And like, I just feel like that's also, you know, it's good to bring up to talk about, because it's like you just have so many different obstacles that people had that like they had to figure out a way to, I don't know, exist. But then, you know, not everyone was in on that. You know, like Frank Agnew and Joe Escalante, and they weren't part of that at all. Like, so it's kind of
they did everything to avoid it. Because if the way we open the part with the Vandals is Joe has his drum kit stolen by TSOL. And had to pay to get it back. And it was that he was mad that it not so much about the money, but that it was detuned to not.
All right, so let's talk about, we talked about the structure and where you started. We talked about, you know, some of the early punk days. Moving in a little bit, was there stuff that, is there a holy grail that got away? Like something that you either couldn't use, or someone that you couldn't talk to, or some aspect of the book that's not part of the book that you can dish about now? Or are you gonna sit here and piss me off and say, no, everyone we...
No, there were a few, there were only a handful of people we couldn't get to, and they know who they are. It's the best way to say it.
But yeah, I mean, in some cases it was just, if we couldn't get somebody, there was always a band member or a manager or someone willing to talk to us. And I think in a lot of cases that was more beneficial, because they got sort of a perspective on the band that others might not have had, who are in the band or the band members themselves. So, you know, in that case, in that regard, you know, like Jim Garino was a huge source for us. And, you know, he managed several of the bands on that cover, you know, so Social Distortion and
Awesome.
The Offspring,
No Doubt,
and the Vandals for a little bit, you know. So, and he definitely had, I think, a really interesting perspective, because, you know, he also worked at Golden Voice too, and so I think those kind of things kind of tie in all the elements that we're trying to discuss about the evolution of it, and how like the smart decisions that were made in the moment, and whether bands listened to those like wise ideas or not, and then like what the outcome was, and how that resulted in some bands being, I guess, a little more successful commercially.
Some of the best stuff I liked was the stuff we got about Dennis from his widow. Like hearing some of those stories that really built
Dennis Tennell.
Yeah, Dennis Tennell, who died in 2000, and just speaking with her about him, it was just amazing to hear like these like wild stories about what a fun guy he was to hang around with. Even with Jim building him up, and as a composite also, was Jim actually, I spoke with him earlier today, and he told me a story about just what Dennis was like, and how when Mike had his struggles, Dennis was the one keeping the whole thing together, and he had so much respect for him. And then hearing from Christy what Dennis was like, and how, you know, he'd, you know, help like build cars and like be involved with that, and then be at Mike's side as Mike was recovering. And just, you got a real sense of who he was, because he couldn't speak for himself, and everyone loved him. He was a universally beloved figure in this thing. You couldn't find a single person who said a bad thing about him.
Yeah, that's outstanding when you can find other people who are willing to talk. When I started writing this book about SST Records, I knew I had to reach out to Greg Ginn to see if he would be interested in an interview. And I'm actually shocked when he responded to me and said, no, I gave up giving interviews a long time ago. And I was very much relieved when that happened, because I didn't want to have to maneuver around, you know, this revisionist history that I knew I was going to get, or even worse, be brought into this circle only then to be eventually frozen out, which is the story of everyone who's ever been in Black Flag. which some young people are going to soon find out. And so it was kind of like a blessing in disguise, but I also found that like sometimes like going to, you know, the lead singer or the focal point of the band is not the best approach. And the most rewarding interviews I got were from drummers, because no one ever thinks to ask the drummer, hey, what do you think? And out of everyone in the band, they're the one that sees everything, right?
Right,
You know?
yeah, the perspective, yeah.
You quite literally see everything.
So after a while, I started like targeting drummers, and like I don't need to go through a million emails of yes, no, maybe, when drummers are kind of like just waiting to be asked. So that's a free tip for you. So you're not going to give up any juicy things that didn't make it into the book. What about surprises? What surprised you writing this book?
Just the path and how these people noticed, were self-aware of their growth was a big thing. Like, all of them know, like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that back then. It was just the maturity level of holy shit, we were like real fucked up. And it was just like, and they're looking back at kind of with the, you know, we were type of thing. Because we love that, because the awareness and just all of them, because they all got arrested. I mean, the average arrests per person in this book has got to be at least 2 or 3 minimum.
Yeah, easily.
So hearing them talk about those stories was always funny, and just looking back, like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that type of thing. Like, there's a part about Sublime where Bud talks about being on the Warped Tour, and he was arrested, I think, twice in 2 days, and he almost missed. They had it because the Warped Tour back then, they changed their set time around, so you never knew, and they called it pretty much a Sublime rule. So to make sure that they were ready to play the show at any time, if they had to play at noon, they had to get up and go. And one day, Bud almost didn't make the show because he was elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, on that topic, I think the Warped Tour parts of that sort of surprised me in that, you know, I think when I was going to those as a, you know, college kid, it was like, oh, it was the Warped Tour. It was already established. It was this, you know, amazing thing that came, you know, it started, I mean, it like started, you know, in Southern California, and it always, you know, came to like whether it's Pomona or Fullerton. And it was great, you know, but I never thought of it as anything but a success. And it was definitely not that for the first couple of years. And like, I think listening and talking to Kevin Lyman about it and some of the bands that were there, and how just like, it was just like poverty on wheels for the majority of that first year. I thought that was pretty eye-opening. And it also taught me about how some of these, you know, how these type of things can pivot. And a lot of times they didn't always know when it was gonna happen. So like with the Vans shoe brand involvement, you know, how they both needed each other at a very crucial time. Like Vans was like going down, you know, definitely had some financial struggles, but like needed something for it to pop back up into relevance again, you know, since the Spicoli era. They needed something like in the like late, you know, at that point, like in the you know, mid 90s to kind of like reinvigorate. And so the Warped Tour, I mean, it actually wasn't even called the Warped Tour in the beginning. It's kind of funny because originally it was supposed to be called The Bomb, and they, like the day before the tickets went on sale, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And so they're like, shit, we can't call it that. And so, you know, Lyman called up the editor for Warp magazine, like begging, like, say, can I please use your name? And like, in order to like just change really fast, it was the first name he thought of that could, you know, could work, because, you know, the Warped magazine was all about like skateboarding, and it just fit perfectly with the theme. So he said, okay, and you know, that's why it's called the Warped Tour. It's just kind of one of those things along the way that were just like these sort of like serendipitous moments that you couldn't research or really know all that much about unless you talk to the people involved and kind of get behind like the myth of it all. Those type of things really interested me in terms of like how punk became sort of like this, Southern California punk specifically became like this sort of like worldwide phenomenon.
Well, with like you, I remember going to Warped Tour in the 90s and thinking it was like, oh, big corporate, you know, established festival rock, you know, kind of like writing for Flipside fanzine and Razor Cake scene, you know, I always had kind of a negative view towards those because anytime the fancier the show I tried to get into to cover, like the more shit I would get from the bouncers and the people at the door. Whereas, you know, if you can say LA Times or NPR, like, well, they'll guide you right in and hand you a drink on the way. But if you're just writing for a zine, they'll like just pretend you're not even there. They don't even care. But so I was looking at some photos from 1996, and I'm like, oh, there's Reverend Horton Heat. Like, oh, there's Mike Watt. I forgot that. I'm like, oh, is that fucking Eminem? Like, I have photos of Eminem.
Eminem was there.
Yeah, like things I don't barely even remember. But I have an interesting Warped Tour story from the Bad Religion days I couldn't use in the book. But I'm gonna share it with you now because it's fucking great. So, Bad Religion, Pennywise, NoFX, and Lagwagon, I think probably are four of the bands that have been on Warped Tour the most. And what they would do is they would take their tour buses and they would form like a circle, like a wagon ring, right? And that way they could have their own little private area in the parking lot and party in there and people going in the buses, but more importantly, keep people out. Well, one day, one of the bigger names on the festival got wind of this private party going on and wanted to go in and was denied. And this person was Kid Rock, and the person doing the denying was Fletcher. And the story, which was told secondhand, which is why we couldn't use it, is that he basically snatched Kid Rock's chain, threw it over the fence of the parking lot. So like, not only can you not come in, go get your shit, you know, and don't come back. So
that's how Baba to Ba was written.
Yes, yes, exactly. So I think we can get to a point where we can open this up to questions from you guys. If you have questions, if not, we can continue on. Anybody have questions about this new book?
What do you consider the first Orange County punk rock band?
The question is, what do you consider the first Orange County punk rock band?
Well, I mean, the Mechanics were definitely up there for the Fullerton scene. So, I mean, I think that, you know, they were kind of like the band that inspired and influenced a lot of the, you know, the stuff that people consider classic OC punk from the Fullerton area. So that was like kind of where that's like one of the main ones that we looked at as far as like one of the originators. And actually the singer for that band, Scott Hoogland, just passed away about a week ago, or a few days,
Mm-hmm.
a few days ago.
Yeah.
And we got to speak to him for our book. And I mean, that right there is also, I think, a key reason why we did something like this, which was to show like respect and, you know, sort of like be able to, you know, give some sort of like history on these bands while we can still do it, get it directly from some of the sources. And obviously there was plenty that we couldn't because for obvious reasons they were not with us anymore. So, but that was one specifically, you know, that like even Mike Ness was like, you have to mention.
Yeah, him
like,
and Rick Agnew were like, oh, the mechanics. And Rick has a funny story about them in there, about their performance. And Mike was just like that. We're you know, we wouldn't be anywhere without the Mechanics. And if you look them up on Discogs or you try to stream them, good luck. You're not going to find anything.
Yeah, there's one single. Yeah, I listened to it.
There was one, I think there's one LA Times article on them, and when we were doing our research in Cleveland, we found one Maximum Rock and Roll, Remember When type of article on them, which we proceeded to lose that article. So it really shows you how, you know, what Jim was saying about hold on to everything. We learned the hard way what happens when you don't.
Thank you for that. Oh, we're gonna go in order now down this line, so you guys have your questions.
I haven't read the book yet, but
Steve Soto was in a few bands. Is there a lot of mention of him in there?
Yeah, definitely. We talk a lot about
Question is there a lot of mentions of Steve Soto?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we talk a lot about Steve, and you know, he was definitely somebody who was a major innovator in those early days, and was sort of, again, part of that first wave. And his bass playing, but also his songwriting and his vocals and everything. It's just like, it's just so deeply woven in to the sound of Southern California, but like definitely Orange County. Just a great songwriter and a great guy. And you know, I when I was at OC Weekly, I did a cover on him after he passed away. But it was like that. A lot of that material sort of made it in because, you know, we got to talk about how even, you know, he had like a sort of a ubiquitous nickname, Hokey, and how he got that was, you know, from basically fighting with his former bandmates in Agent Orange, and they, you know, one of them knocked him to the ground, Scott Miller, I think, and just told him, "You play hokey bass." Like he was like basically making fun of him, and that was just, you know, the name that stuck with him for people that knew him. And so, but yeah, we talk about Soto a lot, you know.
There's a great photo of him from back in the day that Ed Culver shot. It's captures his ethos, I feel.
Yeah.
And I remember I met Steve at the Doll Hut, and my first impression was like, oh, this is the bouncer at the Doll Hut, because I was new to California in the late '90s and started going down there. You know, I was really into a lot of the late '90s, early '20s hostage record bands, and would often play at the Doll Hut. And so then I got to understand, like, oh wow, this guy is like a legend. He's not the doorman, you know, he's probably the general manager working as the doorman, but he always remembered me and was super kind and super cool. And it's not like I was trying to be like I'm on the guest list at Linda's Doll Hut, but I would see him at other places, and you know, and it wasn't just like he would only remember me at the Doll Hut or something. He was, you know, remember me at other places, and it's just there are about 1 million people who have that exact same memory of him, of always being kind, always being generous to a fault.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why he's memorialized so heavily. It's just, you know, it is just a beyond a fact. I think that we, you know, a lot of times it depends on who you ask with these things, but in a lot of cases, like when it comes to like the Dennis Tennells or Steve, it's just like, or like Frank Agnew, or it's just like everyone kind of can agree that these are like geniuses that were super humble, that made space for other people in their bands, and knew when, you know, things were working and when things weren't, but at any point they were still just like generally like good people to be around.
Next, you guys, you have a question, right? How was Cruel World?
It's great.
All right.
It was,
Nick Cave.
I loved it. Nick Cave was great.
Oh,
Go-Go's were questioned.
we got one.
Who's speaking? Question, yeah.
Why no mention of Bone Crusher?
Oh.
Why no mention about? How do you know that? Did you read the book, sir?
No, I didn't read it. And I don't plan on reading it.
Well, it's on page 62, paragraph.
Sorry about that. I take it
That's
all
a
back.
lie.
Well, if you got Bone Crusher, it's a good book. Right?
Yeah, I don't think Raybo's in the book. Yeah.
But to your larger roast there, I think there's a lot of bands I want to say that probably should be in this book in heavy detail, and some that, you know, maybe will be in subsequent books that we do. I think we as like a pair had to really work hard to drill down on like what we were going to talk about and how, because otherwise you're just going to get an unfinishable book and nobody's going to read that. So because it won't, you know, it just won't ever be done. And I think we tried to stick to, I mean, even though the whole title Tearing Down the Orange Curtain was, I think, was the first title we even thought of.
It was supposed to be a working title.
It was supposed to be working. We were just like, this is cool, but we'll fix it.
Good placeholder.
And then the sub had like how punk rock brought Orange County to the world. It was kind of like our mission statement in a way, because we had to see like which bands were part of that in like what way that we could describe based on some of the key players that we knew that we had to talk about. And that may have resulted in some bands being like mentioned, some bands got like a paragraph or two, some bands got pages, some bands got chapters. It just, that was just like the decisions that we made. And I think I speak for Dan a little bit, but I think we stick by a lot of those decisions. There's no way to write about everything that happened, but I do think that guiding through the idea of like how a subculture gets blown up into something that, why do people know or care what the surf, like in Berlin, what the surf is like in Costa Mesa? There are people, when you travel to these different places that you've all gone, I'm sure, you see them wearing Social Distortion, you see them wearing Agent Orange or whatever. You go to festivals, and it's like they're wearing, they know about Orange County. Like, how? Why? Or they know about Sublime. I mean,
There you go.
we're in Long Beach, for God's sakes. Sublime is ubiquitous. But like, how do they know that? And so a lot of the bands, and again, Sublime is another one where it's like, there's just so many bands that kind of had to happen. And some of the people are in this room that like know this. And it's like all these bands, you'd be hard pressed to really find in-depth articles and stories about them all in one place. And I think that was what we could do with our format, was to highlight those bands and show like the sort of the lineage and kind of move forward from there, and not get too hung up on like, oh, they played this one show at this club and this date. Like, it just was too much. So that's where we tried to kind of be editors in that sense. So.
Yeah, because we could have written a whole book about OC hardcore. I mean, that's its own book, and it would have been, could have easily knocked out 300 pages on that by itself for how influential it was. But to Nate's point, someone in Berlin gonna care about that, or even gonna know. But they know who DI is. They know No Doubt is.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to point out that you guys would commend you at writing a very readable book. And we all have those books on our shelves, or at least I know I have a few of them, that are just like these 9,000 word tomes in tiny little type that I'm never going to get through, because at the end of the day, it's just not a readable book. I may wish all that information could be downloaded into my head so that I could then forget it 2 weeks later. But it's just, you want the experience of reading your book to be pleasurable. And so you have to make those hard decisions. For me, in the SST book, it was St. Vitus was a band that, one of my favorite bands in the SST catalog, hugely important band for doom metal, important in the story of SST, a little bit, yeah, because that's one of those, I don't think that the Seattle sound takes off if not for Black Flag and St. Vitus going up there together. But at the same time, beyond that, I couldn't spend, hours in the van with St. Vitus. But since I've finished, having all of SST as my homework, I've probably listened to more of St. Vitus than any other SST band. I know I have. I still listen to it.
That's been a fun byproduct, is reliving the music while we're writing to get the energy. It's like we reconnected with everything that we loved about the sound with this.
You had a question over here.
Oh, yes. I was wondering, was there any chapter or specific band that you found to be the most difficult to write about?
Difficult.
And if so, why?
Thanks for that question, anonymous person that I've never met before. Difficult to write.
The journey for some of these bands was the difficult part, not the actual writing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, obviously we tried to get like, Gwen and stuff, like talking about like No Doubt and everything, but I think that was something that, while it was difficult in like, the constant, being told, yeah, sure, she'll do it, or she might, and then no, she won't. Like those kind of frustrations. Again, we constantly just found different angles on how to write about No Doubt in here, and a lot of people would be like, well, why is No Doubt in a book about OC Punk? Well, because of the influences that brought them around. I mean, it really was a lot of punk music. I mean, the music of the Vandals was huge for them, and just so many different bands that came before them, and they were you can hear it in their sound, you can hear it you can see it in their sort of aesthetic and sort of how they moved, even though they were pretty squeaky clean compared to like most, even their like Sublime, who they were pals with.
You couldn't get two more different bands than that.
But so difficulty. Yeah, I mean, I guess it was just more like trying to force like I said, like how can we talk about the band of like, in a way that shows like how they brought the Orange County culture to the world. And that's not necessarily something that only the band can talk about, only the front person can talk about. There's just so much behind all that. So we just kind of had to get creative in that sense.
Did somebody, yes?
Yeah, so one thing I was kind of wondering is, so like, you've got this separation between LA scene and the OC scene and everything. And I'm just kind of wondering that, kind of based on the work that y'all did, of course, you were writing for OC Weekly and whatnot, you're talking a lot about how these bands are bringing the OC scene to the world through punk and everything. But I'm curious to know, over the process of this, what do y'all think was kind of the influence of OC on the band, on the scene itself, like kind of the bigger culture of Orange County that this scene is existing in?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we talk a lot about that in there, and just in terms of,
Well, I'll just throw one thing out. I didn't write this book. You didn't ask me for any quotes. Not that I hold that against you. But where is the Fender guitars made?
Fullerton.
Yeah.
You could say that
Dumpster diving.
Fender is, Fullerton's one of the most influential rock cities in the world.
Yeah, some of the guys would tell us they would dumpster dive and get discarded guitars and just make it their own, and that's how they got their guitars. That's how they started playing. And place is very much a big part of this, because for the beach bands like the surf sound that was popularized by Dick Dale. I mean, they incorporated and sped it up, and it became ubiquitous. And then inland, it's heavier and harder, and place is very much a big part of who these people were, and it shaped their identity in many ways.
Also, I think just the way some of these bands grew up, talking about, a lot of middle class, like living and stuff. I mean, literally punk band, middle class. I mean, there you go. I mean, but that was, I think a theme that we saw over and over again was, sort of that, people in a band that spent an inordinate amount of time together because they were related. Middle class being one, the Agnews, Adolescents, the Crowd, Jim and Jay Decker, and they had garages. They had houses with garages. They could be a garage band. They could practice forever because they had a place. And I think that there's a lot of that element in there tied together with, just the things that they naturally did as kids that we all still did, that I did when I discovered their music, which was like surfing and skateboarding and biking and being outside and like enjoying the weather, which you can't necessarily do in Detroit in the winter, right? You're doing it in a different way, but it's like, just the backdrop of Orange County in that sense helped inspire the music a lot.
And Reaganism. A lot of these folks did not like that, and they did not like the choices their parents made, and being a punk was a backlash to that in many cases. Listen to that first TSOL EP. It kind of says it all right there.
Very good. Any other question? Oh, there we go.
So I find a lot of times when books like this come out, that's when the gems actually make their way to the authors. So what things have you been informed of since this publication, or since you had to say we're done, no more writing, that you wish you could have added?
I mean, well, it just came out yesterday. No, I'm just playing. Yeah, no. I know that we'll get a lot, and I think I look forward to that because number one, if we're able to sell enough of these things, they're going to let us do another print, another round, and we'll be able to add some more layers and context to this stuff. But yeah, I mean, books like this are also meant to be argued over as well. I think that people are always going to be like, oh, it didn't happen like this, or like, oh, this is,
We're already racing for that.
Different perspectives, are what they are, and we totally understand that part of it. But since we've done, we just did like an exhaustive amount of interviews, and I also, we got a lot of these people in times where they weren't expecting it necessarily, and like, hey, do you have like an hour to talk about, your band from 1981? And like, or do you have, a couple of times where we can talk and, they weren't, I'm sure they left stuff out. And so there's points where, they're like, oh, I meant to say this and that. And it's like, well, we already turned in the book. But again, I think what I hope happens from this book and it being like sort of like the first Orange County punk book, not even air quotes, it is because we looked, but I would say I hope that it's the first and not the last. I mean, I hope that there are more bands and people that we talk to in this book that deserve like their own biographies, that deserve to be telling their own stories that come out as a result of stuff like this. So yeah, I mean, but we've gotten mostly just like, we'd given early drafts of the book to a few like select people to like read it and be like, kind of like help us with like fact checking. And that was really helpful like on the second round of edits for our book, because we did have like a couple different rounds, but overall it was like we had to kind of keep all that to a minimum too, because otherwise we would miss a deadline on that.
Wait, did you say another?
No, we didn't miss any deadlines.
No, we didn't miss any deadlines.
We didn't miss any deadlines, but what I'm saying, I just think that we had to do our best with the interviews that we got, and overall, I think we did pretty good.
Yeah, and everyone was pretty accommodating if we had follow-ups. Some people took a little bit longer than others for various reasons, but we generally got to fill in the blanks where we felt satisfied where it ended up. Because sometimes they didn't answer the questions, so it was hard to pull it out. We'd say this, and they'd say, oh, what about that? And we kind of had to just roll with it.
Well, if everyone in this room buys a copy of, of course, Tearing Down the Orange Curtain, but also the SST book, then maybe I can do another version and write about this Black Flag's newest lineup that's rolling out this week. I'm sure you're all chuckling because you've all seen the memes, or maybe you even made some yourselves.
And that is, my opinion, Jim's book is one of the best books ever written about punk. So if you don't have it, please buy it.
Too kind.
It's the truth.
All right, so how about let's buy all the books, every last one of them. Let's go.
Thank you guys for coming, checking it out, and listening to us.